You grew up watching your sibling take the spotlight, whether through achievement, rebellion, or chaos, and somewhere deep inside you learned a quiet rule. Your presence doesn't matter. You became the invisible one. The child who learned to survive by shrinking, by being agreeable, by not needing too much. You believed that invisibility was safety. But that survival strategy came with a devastating cost, the erosion of your sense of worth. This is the story of the invisible sibling and how a childhood spent fading into the background becomes a lifelong, aching search to finally be seen. The trauma of the invisible sibling doesn't come from overt abuse or cruelty. It is a trauma of omission. It's what didn't happen. The words that were never said. The recognition that never came. Maybe your parents were consumed with your brother's accomplishments, always praising his grades, his trophies, his leadership. Or maybe your sister's constant rebellion demanded all the attention, leaving no emotional space for you. So you adapted. You told yourself, if I'm quiet, I won't cause trouble. You learned to manage your own emotions, soothe your own needs, and expect nothing in return. Over time, this emotional starvation didn't make you stronger, it made you disappear. In psychology, this is called parental attunement failure. It means that your caregivers didn't notice your emotional reality. They didn't mirror your feelings back to you, so you never developed a solid sense of self. You weren't ignored completely. You were tolerated, functionally invisible, a shadow child in a household that didn't have enough attention to go around. The problem is, when you grow up in that environment, you internalize invisibility as identity. You don't just feel unseen, you believe you are unseeable. Think about it. Every time you had something to share and it was brushed off. Not now. We're busy. Let's focus on your brother. Your brain formed a connection. Attention equals conflict. Expression equals rejection. So, you withdrew. You built a life strategy around quietness, and it worked. For a while. You became the peacekeeper, the helper, the listener. Everyone's favorite person to rely on. But inside, there was a constant hum of resentment and longing. You wanted to scream, "What about me?" But the words felt forbidden. You learned to silence that part of yourself until it went numb. As adults, invisible siblings often gravitate toward roles where they can be useful but not visible. They become the dependable colleague, the supportive partner, the person who does everything right, but still feels unseen. They often find themselves in relationships where they overgive emotionally and receive little in return. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because it feels familiar. Familiarity masquerades as comfort, even when it hurts. You were trained to earn connection by minimizing yourself, and that pattern follows you everywhere. Let's take a closer look at how that works. Imagine you're in a relationship, and your partner starts to pull away emotionally. For most people, that would be painful, but also a signal to ask for clarity or to walk away. For someone with the invisible sibling wound, it activates something deeper. You don't feel anger, you feel fear. Fear that you did something wrong, fear that you're about to be forgotten again. So you try harder, you become more understanding, more patient, more giving. You do the emotional labor of two people thinking that if you just love harder, you'll finally be seen. But the more you give, the more you reinforce your own invisibility. That's the tragic loop of this trauma. Your brain still equates visibility with danger and invisibility with safety, but your heart is starving for recognition. You live between two opposing instincts, the need to be seen and the fear of being seen. Every compliment makes you suspicious. Every spotlight makes you uncomfortable. You may even downplay your successes. It's not a big deal. Anyone could have done it. Because praise feels like attention you haven't earned. This is where the drive for adult recognition begins to consume you. The child who disappeared becomes the adult who performs. You work harder, achieve more, say yes to everything, trying to prove your worth through action. You might chase degrees, titles, or partners who validate you because deep down you believe that if someone important finally sees you, it will erase the years of invisibility. But no external validation ever feels like enough because the original injury wasn't about the world not seeing you, it was about your parents not seeing you. And your nervous system still believes that if they didn't notice, no one truly can. From a psychological perspective, this is called narcissistic wounding by omission. It doesn't mean your parents were narcissists necessarily. It means your emotional development was shaped in an environment where your feelings were not mirrored back. In families with a golden child, the invisible sibling becomes the counterbalance, the emotional regulator of the household. You likely became hyper-attuned to other people's moods, anticipating needs before they were spoken. This hypervigilance turns into a skill later in life. You read rooms effortlessly, you sense tension instantly, but it also means you lose touch with your own emotions. You feel other people's needs more clearly than your own. When someone asks you, "What do you want?" it is not that you don't want anything, it is that you genuinely don't know. You were never taught to have preferences that mattered. You learned that having needs was a liability, that asking for too much made people pull away. So you keep performing emotional self-erasure, convincing yourself that being low maintenance is noble. But deep down, there's a quiet desperation, the craving to finally matter to someone. One of the most painful realities about this trauma is how invisible it remains even in adulthood. Society rewards invisibility disguised as selflessness. You're praised for being humble, modest, reliable. No one sees the exhaustion underneath. You can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly unseen. You might even confuse being needed with being loved. When someone depends on you, you feel valued. But the moment they no longer do, you feel discarded. Because your worth has always been defined by your function, not your existence. This invisible wound also shapes your perception of others. You might envy people who command attention effortlessly, the ones who seem magnetic, outspoken, unapologetic. But part of you also resents them. You tell yourself they're arrogant, self-absorbed, dramatic. What is really happening is that they mirror the part of you you have repressed, the part that wants to take up space, the part that wants to say, "Look at me, I matter too." Healing this kind of trauma begins with the radical act of visibility. Not external visibility, likes, praise, or recognition, but internal visibility. It's about learning to witness yourself, to name your emotions, your desires, your pain, without minimizing them. It's the slow, uncomfortable process of unlearning the lie that your worth depends on being quiet, useful, or invisible. It means allowing yourself to take up space, even when it feels unsafe. You don't have to become loud or dominant to be visible. Visibility is simply the courage to exist without apology. It's saying, "I don't need to be the best or the worst to matter." For someone who grew up in the shadow of others, that's revolutionary. The invisible sibling learned to survive by disappearing. The adult must now learn to live by being seen. And that begins when you stop performing for recognition and start recognizing yourself. If this story resonates with you, if you've spent your life chasing acknowledgement that never seems to come, know that you're not broken. You were conditioned to believe invisibility was safety, but the truth is your presence has always mattered. You were simply in a family system that couldn't see it. If this spoke to you, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to The Fictionist. Your support helps us bring hidden psychological stories like this to light. Stories that live in the shadows, waiting to be seen, just like you. As the invisible child grows into adulthood, the unspoken hunger for recognition doesn't disappear. It transforms. The quiet child who learned to survive by fading into the background becomes the adult who chases validation with an almost sacred desperation. Every success, every achievement, every compliment becomes a lifeline, a temporary proof that they exist, that they matter, that someone, somewhere, finally sees them. But beneath that drive for recognition lies the same core wound, the absence of parental sight. And no amount of applause can fill the silence that shaped them. The adult's compulsion for validation is one of the most misunderstood psychological defenses. On the surface, it looks like ambition, confidence, or charisma. These are the people who stand out in a crowd, who work tirelessly, who refuse to rest. They might be the most accomplished in their field, the ones who made it. But if you listen closely, you can hear the anxiety behind their achievements. It's not joy that drives them, it's fear. Fear of being unseen again. Fear that if they stop performing, they'll vanish. The same way they did as children. In psychology, this is known as compensatory over-adaptation. It's what happens when the nervous system overcorrects for early emotional neglect by seeking external markers of worth. The invisible sibling who grew up in the shadow of the golden child often decides, consciously or not, that the only way to exist is to become extraordinary. They work harder, achieve more, and set impossible standards, believing that success will finally buy them visibility. But the tragedy is that even when they reach the top, it never feels like enough. The applause fades and the silence returns. Because what they crave isn't attention, it's attunement. They don't want to be seen for what they do. They want to be seen for who they are. Imagine a woman who grew up with a sibling who could do no wrong, a brother who was the family's golden child. Every dinner conversation revolved around his grades, his sports, his future. She learned early that her role was to be the easy one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who stayed quiet so her parents could focus on him. As an adult, she becomes a lawyer, top of her class, driven, relentless. She builds a life of accomplishment, but inside she feels hollow. Every award, every compliment gives her a fleeting sense of relief, followed almost immediately by guilt and emptiness. The little girl inside her whispers, "Do you see me now?" But no one ever hears it, because even she doesn't. This is how invisible children become high-functioning adults who cannot rest. They measure their worth by their output. Their calendar becomes their mirror. Their self-esteem rises and falls with external feedback. A project well received feels like oxygen. Criticism feels like suffocation. Their nervous system is still wired to equate being noticed with survival. When people applaud, it feels like love. When people ignore them, it feels like death. It's not just about career, either. This compulsion seeps into relationships. The adult who was unseen as a child often attaches themselves to emotionally distant partners because deep down they're still trying to recreate the original dynamic, with a new hope that this time they'll win. They confuse attention with affection, praise with love, validation with safety. And when the partner doesn't give enough attention, it reactivates that old terror of being invisible. They overextend themselves emotionally, trying to earn visibility the same way they once tried to earn affection from their parents. The moment they stop performing, when they're not entertaining, not impressive, not useful, they fear they'll disappear again. From an analytical standpoint, this cycle is a textbook example of narcissistic injury compensation. It's not narcissism in the pop culture sense. It's the psychological attempt to repair a fragmented self-image through external recognition. When a person's emotional development was shaped in a context where their inner world was ignored, they learn to build their identity around what others reflect back. Their sense of self is like a mirror that only works when others are looking at it. Alone, it goes blank. This is why people with this trauma often have a complicated relationship with visibility. They crave attention, but it terrifies them. They want to be seen, but they don't believe they're truly worth seeing. So they perform. They curate an image that feels acceptable enough to draw approval, but safe enough to protect the real, unseen self. They become perfectionists, chasing flawless execution because mistakes risk rejection, and rejection feels like erasure. The irony is that many of these adults are drawn to careers that demand visibility: acting, writing, teaching, entrepreneurship. Not because they love the spotlight, but because the spotlight offers the illusion of safety. Being seen by thousands feels like proof that they finally matter. But it's a fragile kind of safety, dependent on performance, reputation, and external opinion. The moment applause fades or criticism arises, the illusion cracks and the old wound reopens. They start to feel like that overlooked child again, voiceless, unseen, unimportant. Let's take a step deeper into the emotional mechanics of this. The invisible child internalized two powerful beliefs: I am not enough to be noticed, and if I want love, I must earn it. As an adult, those beliefs become invisible operating systems guiding every decision. They overwork, overgive, overshare, all in an attempt to earn visibility. Every like, every compliment, every success feels like evidence that maybe, finally, they are enough. But the subconscious mind doesn't register it as real nourishment. It treats it like junk food, temporary satisfaction that leaves the hunger stronger than before. This creates what psychologists call a validation loop. The person becomes trapped in cycles of external pursuit followed by internal emptiness. They may even develop anxiety or depression when the external world doesn't mirror them positively. This emotional dependency isn't a sign of weakness. It's the natural result of emotional neglect. When love was conditional or absent in childhood, validation becomes a substitute for attachment. It's not vanity, it's survival. The problem is that the adult's environment keeps rewarding the very behavior that sustains their emptiness. They're praised for their work ethic, admired for their resilience, respected for their drive. Society celebrates their output without ever questioning the pain that fuels it. To everyone else, they seem successful. But late at night, when the applause is gone, they lie awake wondering why they still feel invisible, why the love they receive never lands, why they keep achieving but can't feel proud. The truth is simple but brutal. External validation cannot heal internal neglect. You can't fill a childhood void with adult achievements. The only way to break the compulsion is through internal validation, learning to witness and affirm your own existence without needing the world to echo it back. But for someone whose survival depended on being invisible, that's not easy. When you've spent your life measuring your worth through others' eyes, turning inward feels like walking into darkness. The silence that terrified you as a child returns. Yet it's in that silence that healing begins. Here is the paradox. The invisible sibling spent their entire life trying to be seen by others, but the healing only starts when they see themselves. Not through the distorted lens of performance, not through the judgment of others, but through self-recognition, the quiet, powerful act of saying, I matter, even when no one is watching. And that's the truth hidden beneath the adult's relentless pursuit of the spotlight. The craving for recognition isn't greed, it's grief. Grief for the childhood that never got witnessed. Grief for the version of you that had to disappear so others could shine. And until that grief is felt, no amount of success will ever feel like enough. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever chased validation just to feel visible, or worked yourself to exhaustion trying to prove your worth, know that you're not alone. What you're feeling isn't vanity or weakness, It's the echo of a child who just wanted to be seen. If this spoke to you, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to The Fictionist. It helps us share stories like this, stories about the unseen psychology behind ambition, loneliness, and the hidden wounds that shape our lives.